Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We are gonna get started, and if others would like to join as we go along, then um, we'll welcome them in, and we can answer any questions that they might have from what they missed along the way. So, happy Monday, everybody. I hope everybody, at least here locally in Madison, is enjoying our first day of fake spring, or maybe our second day of fake spring. There will be more fake springs to come, no doubt. But at least here we almost got up to 70 today, I think. Um, so anyway, by way of introduction, I'm recognizing some names in the attendee list here, but for those of you who don't know me, I'm Dan. I'm our test prep director. I'll let Justin do his quick intro as well.
Hello, everyone. If you don't know me, my name is Justin Clarke. I'm our Associate Director of College Counseling here. Excited to talk to you about the ins and out of testing and how it actually matters tonight.
Yeah. So here's the rundown of what we're going to cover, and then we'll do more formal introductions. We're going to start with kind of just a really brief history of the ACT and SAT and how they factor into college admissions, or they have factored historically into college admissions. I'm going to do a quick overview of ACT, SAT, and PSAT. I'll throw it back to Justin to talk about what we're seeing, the sort of the meat of the presentation, I think, what we're seeing with the trends and how colleges are thinking about these tests right now, and how those currently factor into the admissions process. I'll talk a little bit about how we do our test prep to get students ready for these exams. We'll talk about how we can help your students out, and then we'll take questions. I think, typically what we do is we monitor the Q&A or the chat as we go along. Most of the questions we'll address at the end, but if there's one that's particularly pertinent to what we're talking about, we'll try to address it in real time as well.
Perfect. And then just a little bit more of in-depth. Again, hello, everyone. My name is Justin Clarke. I'm originally from the Midwest. Thankfully, I'm a recent transplant to New Orleans, so my weather is about 80 today, and hopefully I extend some of that up north to you all, so spring can actually sprung in the Midwest. Um, Just like Dan, I'm a very proud graduate of Northwestern University. They convinced me to come back right after graduation, and that's where I got my start in admissions. While I was there, I owned the East Coast and the Mid-Atlantic region, so I traveled a lot and enrolled a lot of amazing students. Over the past 12 years or so, I've been a director at the undergraduate level, the graduate level, been a high school college counselor, worked in nonprofits, and now I'm very happy to be a proud team member of Galin. So excited to give you all a little bit of my expertise tonight and hopefully answer a lot of questions.
And I'm Dan, as with Justin, proud NU grad. That's where I got my undergrad degree. I came to UW-Madison for my graduate coursework, my master's in public affairs, originally from the Pittsburgh area. So I've sort of steadily moved north and west, I guess. Um, and yeah, I kind of never left here after I came for grad school. Oh, sorry about the sound. Hopefully that resolves. Maybe I need to do a better job muting when Justin's talking. Uh, I have actually, I need to change this. 13 years of experience doing test prep for ACT, SAT, and PSAT, both before and now that I've joined the team full time as our test prep director. I've, over that time worked with hundreds of students. I work with our tutors very closely to train and support them as they go through with their students and, troubleshoot if we run into any issues. And like I said, I just kind of came to Madison and never left, and I live here with my wife and two little kids. So different stage of life from all of you, but little kids, littler problems, and learning a lot about what to expect as they get older. So I think Justin has the first slide here. I'll go ahead and mute myself, and hopefully that fixes the sound issue.
Definitely. So first, just a brief overview far as the history of testing in college admissions, because while nowadays it is something that is well known and usually begrudgingly taken by high school students across the nation, there's some interesting, as you can say, sides to how it became such an impactful part of the admissions process. So first, let's start with the SAT. started becoming popularized and really started in its entirety in 1926. So we're coming up on the 100 years of the SAT as a known vessel. It was originally designed to measure more so intelligence as opposed to a direct link to academic prowess or making sure that it was a venue for colleges to make sure that students actually paid attention in their core academic areas throughout high school. Now, for the SAT, back then, but also even more so now, it's traditionally been a little bit more popular on the East and the West Coast. Now, compare that to the ACT, newer, roughly about 30 years younger as well. It as opposed to the SAT's origin as a point to measure overall intelligence, it was more specifically designed and created and implemented to measure high school level competencies. And as the SAT is a little bit more popular on the East and the West Coast, usually you're going to see more of a Midwest and a Southern popularity for the ACT. What I will say, both with the popularity that you're going to see for each of these tests, there is not any type of bias or favors that you're going to see at any type of university that you're applying to, whether they require testing or they're test optional. It really is just based off of different contracts that the ACT versus the SAT might have with a particular state, what's popular in that state. And also, and Dan will talk about this as well, when it comes to your test prep, what's going to be the best test to showcase your students' level of academic proficiency and allow them to get the highest and most impressive score. So I just wanted to dispel that, quick rumor that the SAT is better, the ACT is better. They've both been around for so long at this point. It's still its choice, I would say.
Yeah, so just now, this is what the tests are. They have gone undergone many changes in their history. I like to say that the SAT is in its fourth different version since I took it. And so these things they are constantly evolving. They're sort of always kind of competing with each other and trying to get more students to take them. But for as we sit here right now, this is what the tests are. So I'll start at the bottom, just reiterating what Justin said. There's no longer a regional preference for one or the other. This is probably the question. It sounds like he gets it a lot. The question when I'm meeting with families I probably get the most is there one that's better for certain schools or others? And the answer is no. But they are different tests. There's a lot of overlap in between them, and I'm happy to talk more about that. But just sort of at a high level, the ACT maximum score is 36, as it always has been, at least for the last many, many years. That is an average of the English, math, and reading scores. That is not the science score, no longer factors into the composite score. This gets confusing. I will talk about it on the next slide. But it's the average of English, math, and reading. The SAT is the sum of a reading English, reading writing module, and reading English section, I should say, and a math section, each of which have a maximum score of 800. So that's how you get the 1600. And the SAT has two modules, what they call of each. So students will do two reading writing modules, take a break, and then do two math modules. The ACT is offered both paper, pencil, and digital. It's the same test. There's slightly different strategies for each, but the digital ACT, which is slightly a newer thing in the last year, is basically as if somebody took the paper pencil test and made it clickable and put it on a computer. The SAT is only now offered in a digital version, and that is because the SAT is what is called adaptive. This is a type of testing. It's sort of the gold standard for testing because what your sort of classic adaptive test is you get a question wrong, the next question's harder. Or right, rather, the next question's easier. You get a question right, the next question's harder. And the test adapts to your performance as you go along. What the SAT does is they are adaptive by section. So going back to that reading, writing, and math, the first reading, writing module for all students is sort of a mix of easy, medium, and hard questions. And then depending on how they do, they end up either in a harder or an easier second module. Same with math. Easy, medium, hard on the first module. Depending on how they do, the second module is either all mostly hard questions or mostly easy questions. If a student ends up in the easier second module, they cannot get the maximum score of 800. So one thing that we work on really hard with our students right away if they're doing SAT is you have to get into the harder second module to get the maximum score. So I'm happy to talk more about that. I know it's a little confusing. The ACT is not like that. The ACT is your sort of standard, like get as many questions right as you can. There are certain difficulty things that ramp up in certain places, but it's not depending on your performance earlier on the test. Um, this is a confusing thing. The ACT last year went to something called an enhanced ACT. Um, that's some fancy marketing. But basically, it means that they did a couple things to make the test shorter and a little bit more accessible to kids. But the biggest thing is that the science is no longer included in the composite score or official ACT super scoring. It receives its own section score out of 36. Now, colleges can still do whatever they want, and they always have. You can imagine a college that is more focused on a STEM kind of engineering, kid that's the sort of kid that tends to go there. Maybe they'll factor the science back in. Maybe they'll consider it on its own. But officially, the ACT no longer averages the science score in with the composite score. We still think that students should prepare for it until we hear otherwise. We don't really have enough data on this yet. We will, as the years go along. Um, Again, colleges may still consider it. There are science skills that you gain that show up in other places on the ACT as well. So for the ACT, we still require our students to do it. Most of our students will still take the science section when they do official tests. But it is a little bit confusing when you see the science score next to all the other scores, but it doesn't actually factor into the composite. So I always want to make that clear to families. Also, a word on scoring in general. You'll hear us talk about super scoring as we go through this talk. What super scoring is when you take multiple exams and you can combine scores from different sections of those exams into a new higher composite score. So not all colleges super score. Justin is more of an expert on this than I am, but notably UW-Madison does not accept super scores in our neighborhood, but a lot of more schools than not will. And so here's an example of what that might look like. Let's say you have a student taking the December and February ACTs, very common for juniors to do that. And in December, they do well in math and reading, not so well in English. Their composite score is a 26. In February, they worked really hard in English. They got their composite score up, or their English score up 4 points. Math and reading dipped a little bit. Now their composite score is a 27. Without doing anything else, you take the higher English score from February, the higher math and reading scores from December, you combine those, and now you have a composite score of 28. That's higher than either test alone. I also wanted to talk a little bit about the PSAT, especially as the PSAT now is being used in certain places for direct admission if you get a certain score. So this is relevant to anybody here that has a student who's a sophomore or younger. The PSAT is given to juniors in October. It's exactly the same as the SAT. It's digital, it's adaptive. It even has the same number of questions on each section now. It didn't used to do that. They've sort of stopped pretending that it's a very different test. But one thing that is different is the scoring. So the maximum score is not a 1600, it's a 1520. The max section scores are 760, 760. But that's not even what National Merit cares about when they are trying to figure out who's eligible for qualification. They make up this other score called a selection index. What they do to calculate this, you don't have to think too hard about this. It'll show up on your student score report, but just, getting in the weeds a little bit, you chop off the zeros from the section scores and you double the verbal score because technically that's two sections in one. That's a reading and an English section. Add that to the math score. And so an example of this would be if a student scored a 660 on a verbal and a 700 on math, chop off the zeros, so 66 and 70, multiply the verbal score by 2, so 132. 132 plus 70 equals 202. That is the student's selection index. And that is the score that's important for national merit qualification. Um, Here's how that works. So there's different levels of qualification. The first level is called commended. This year for this current senior class, the selection index threshold to be a commended student is around a 210, or is a 210. That's where it's been. It came up a little bit recently, but that's where you could probably expect it to be going forward. About 50,000 students nationwide receive commendation. It's a nice thing for the resume. You're not eligible for scholarships with it, but you could certainly brag about it. Where you start becoming eligible for stuff is at the semifinalist level. This is determined by state, and it's approximately the top 1% of scores in each state. So depending on where you are, literally physically in the country, it could be easier or harder for your students to qualify for this. In Wisconsin, our selection index threshold is going to be around 214, 215 probably. It was 215 this year. I My guess is that it'll be around there. Maybe it'll drop a little bit next year. I think they did something to the test to make it a little more challenging this past year, at least scoring wise. But there are some schools that provide direct admission to semifinalists, including UW. It's hard to get that. And if your student is a national merit semifinalist, they probably have lots of other things going for them. But because it is really hard to get that high score. But that's about the threshold that we expect for Wisconsin. Other places, New York, California, are going to have higher selection indices. Pretty much everybody that becomes a semifinalist also becomes a finalist. There's just a couple of steps you have to go through. There's an application you have to fill out, which includes an essay. And then students have to what they call validate their PSAT score with a subsequent test, an ACT or an SAT. Again, anybody that's at the national merit level on the PSAT is going to be taking ACTs or SATs. So pretty much everybody, there's a very small number of students that are semifinalists but not finalists. Pretty much everybody that's in the semifinalist category advances to become a finalist. And that's what leads to scholarship eligibility. Now, National Merit Corporation itself is pretty stingy with these scholarships, even once you get to finalist. Not even half of the students that get there receive it from National Merit directly. But it allows students to be recognized by corporations and colleges, and those awards can actually be a lot bigger than what National Merit offers, renewable, et cetera. So, for sophomores and below, if your student is, a medium to high scorer, we often recommend that they take the PSAT and give it a shot. If they qualify for national merit, that's amazing. Even if they don't, it's good practice in a proctored official setting. And just wanted to go through when these tests are given. So I mentioned the PSATs in October. It sort of has worked out weirdly. I'm not sure why. The SAT is pretty much available every month in the fall, and the ACT is pretty much available every month in the spring. The March ACT is a Wisconsin specific thing. The public schools in the state are required by the state to give the ACT in March. This is actually happening tomorrow for juniors on March 10th. There's some private schools that will give it as well. And other states have different dates. Illinois has their statewide test in April. But that's a reasonably common thing across the country that states will either administer the ACT or SAT for their students.
And then when it comes to the trends that we've seen, I wanted to give us some context, but not too much context. Because if we go back any more than 10 years, things have definitely drastically changed. But I wanted to point out some universities that are both near us. So thinking about University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, looking 10 years ago in 2015, their average testing on the ACT side of things was a 26 to a 31. So still competitive. And similarly, their SAT equivalency was roughly around a 1270 to a 1470. As you can see in just this past decade, what was their higher end of their average is now their lower end. ACT wise, are coming in at 30, 34. And similarly, they're a bit more forgiving on the SAT. Usually you're seeing about a 1400 to a 1530. If we're going more so to the East Coast, because I've seen a lot more of our Midwest students be very attracted to the big city life and maybe getting out of the Midwest. NYU has always been a very competitive university. In 2015, it was a 29 to a 32 and a 1250 to a 1470. Similar to U of I, their high is now their low. This past year, we're looking at roughly about a 33 to a 35 average and a 1470 to a 1570. So I won't go into all of these, but as you're looking at, nearby universities like a U of I, as you're looking at UGA, for example, or even looking further on the East Coast at University of Maryland, I wanted to give you all this current context and some of the trends that we're seeing still within a reasonable amount of time, but it's kind of a quicker runway the past decade or so to show that testing, while it has always been impactful, as the years have gone by, as we've seen an influx of test takers and a rise in average testing, especially, post-pandemic, it's even more integral. And I know we were just talking about the differences between the newer ACT to how the SAT is digital and just all the different opportunities that you can have. But I really do want to stress that having a good test plan and also being able to work with your counselor to identify the type of colleges that your student is most interested in, it also helps because you kind of set a realistic, I guess you could say, goal or a testing threshold, whether it's the SAT or the SAT, for the type of work that needs to go into the score of your dreams, and also really the score to be as competitive as you can be if you are applying to a either test required or a test optional university, that you do want testing to be a part of your overall application profile. So again, good trends, but in a lump sum, things are definitely a bit more competitive than they were 10 years ago. And then when it comes to really what does testing mean when it comes to the admissions process, how your student is going to be reviewed, and why does it even matter? Especially as we were saying, we're coming up on 100 years of the SAT, or roughly about 70 years of the ACT. So in the grand scheme of things, they're still relatively new mediums. Whether it's the ACT, the SAT, talking about the PSAT, they all truly revolve around being the standard method of review. Now, when it comes to that standard method of review, both of those tests are a go-to because I remember my days at Northwestern. I was on the East Coast. I would see some schools that were on your traditional just college preparation, and they maybe have the highest courses you can take are at the honors level. I saw schools that were on an IB track, schools that had a load of APs being available. I had schools that offered no type of APs or advanced curriculum, and they didn't give out GPAs. They rated students in the number of stars that they got, which was very interesting to review coming from the more traditional Midwest. All of that to say, there's so many thousands of different academic contexts, curriculums, environments that students are going to be applying from when they're applying to these colleges and universities that the ACT, the SAT, even the PSAT for some of the more newer direct admit universities play a key role in kind of standardizing so much and allowing, colleges and universities to kind of best as they can compare a bit of apples to oranges when it comes to the academic context a student is, applying from. A little bit earlier, we touched on the scholarship consideration. Outside of those newer colleges and universities that do take into consideration the PSAT and the national merit, for example, a large role of testing, particularly if your student is interested in any larger public flagship universities, particularly in the South, they will be used when it comes to any type of merit scholarships being given. Because again, as that standard method of review, it allows universities to not only say, hey, we looked over your academics, we looked over your extracurricular activities, you're an amazing writer, we'd be happy to have you on our campus, but what can we look at that really aligns with some of the metrics that we want our students to abide by in our incoming class to be able to make things cheaper? Because just as we looked at the past 10 years averages at some of our universities and how the average test range has really grown exponentially in some regards, the cost of college is also steadily rising. So this allows colleges and universities to help out you all in terms of driving down your overall cost of attendance. And again, being able to use your testing as that standard method of review to equalize things a bit when it comes to giving you a one lump sum or giving you a specialized merit scholarship that's going to knock off, say, $20,000 every single year. And that can also apply to more specific majors or maybe direct admit programs that your student may be applying to. Because something that's very, very popular for the more competitive direct admit programs, which for the most part are going to be your direct admit business and engineering. The past 10, 15 years or so, computer science has gotten up there too. And then there's other highly specialized programs that we like to refer to from an umbrella term as our 4+1s, whether that is students who are on a pre-health track, they've always wanted to go to medical school, they may be applying to a competitive program where they do their undergrad in 3 years and in their last 2 years or so are accelerated towards, a future master's degree, or they get automatic admittance into the university's home school from the medical school perspective. Any of these programs kind of fall within this overarching lesson, which is that as you're looking at the programs that your student is interested in, the majors, for example, definitely look at if they have any information on the college's website, if there's a certain ACT score, they need to be accepted. And Indiana University Kelley School of Business comes to mind as an example here, whether there is a higher average that they might have to be aiming for in the engineering school. Thinking about our backyard, Northwestern McCormick Engineering School is usually have a higher SAT and ACT average of incoming students than its College of Arts and Sciences. But being able to identify these more specific academic majors and possibly competitive direct admit programs is definitely going to allow you to see just the type of role that testing plays in your admissions process. And again, this is going to be the truth, whether you're looking at colleges and universities that are still requiring testing, so you really don't have a choice, it's either the ACT or the SAT, or even the universities that are a bit more understanding and are test optional. In our world, when it comes to admission review, testing helps out because the more data you can have, the more context for your student that you're getting. And it also makes their job on the admission side a little bit easier to designate who's either standing out as a high test taker outlier, or if a student looks good on paper via their high school transcript, the testing aligns with that, and there's no worries about the student being able to handle the rigor at their college. So, just quick overview as far as why does testing actually matter and what role does it play when you're in my former boots, which would be a director of admissions?
Yeah, so now getting into a little bit of how we think about this and prepare students for it. I'm actually going to answer one of the questions in the chat along the way here. So that was a good segue. Meet with me. I'm around for this is again for sophomores and below. Um, I shouldn't say for sophomores. We start working with sophomores after spring break of this year, so we'll start up in April. The earlier you get started, the more opportunities you have to test. And so we usually highly recommend students get started in spring of sophomore year. If you have a student that's younger than that, let us know. We'll bother you next year to come in for consultation and diagnostic exams. But that's how we start things off. And that can go in either order. Students can come in, take a diagnostic ACT, SAT, or both, and meet with me either before or after that to talk about what those diagnostic scores mean and how we can set up a personalized test prep plan for them. Getting to the question in the chat, ACT or SAT or both, we pick one. We have tried in the past, on occasion in the past, we've sort of flipped between the two and it doesn't work. We really do need to focus on one at a time. There is a lot of overlap. I don't have an exact number, but just for a couple of examples, the grammar on the two tests is exactly the same. The rules are identical. So if we ever do, we won't work on both at the same time, but if one's not going great, we can switch to the other one. And when we do that, we don't really have to like redo the grammar. It's the same. Obviously, the math is the math. The concepts are the same. It's just the types of questions that the tests ask, and the way that they ask them can be a little bit different. But the math itself is up through Algebra 2 and stats, just like on both tests. So again, pick one, but there is a fair amount of overlap in content between the two. Again, high scores should also consider doing some prep for PSAT. We have a short PSAT prep that we do sort of as an interlude in between our ACT prep. SAT and PSAT go together, so sometimes we'll just tack on a couple extra sessions for those to prepare for that test in the fall. We set a target test date for every student when they start working with us. That does not mean that that's the only test that they take. In fact, we recommend that students, for a couple different reasons. One is the super scoring that I showed before. Another is just you get more comfortable with the test the more you do it. So we usually recommend the students take at least 3 official exams. And again, getting started earlier rather than later will help with that. And that can be tests before the target test date along the way. That can be tests after the test date if you do additional sessions. We decide the number of sessions based on the diagnostic score. And then we also do regular practice tests along the way to get kids accustomed to what they're going to, we proctor them, the way that they're supposed to be proctored. Hopefully that gives students a sense of what they're going to get into on the real test day. And again, we can always do additional sessions for future exams. Whether a student is not quite happy with the score they have or they did great and they think they can do even better. Again, we usually recommend that students do at least 3. If you have a junior, we still have time. It's tight, but we can still do it. So if you have a junior, get in touch with me ASAP. And there are usually, with some exceptions, students can test till October or so of senior year. And those test dates are usually still early enough for students to submit scores for their applications. So on the test prep side, one thing that I always emphasize, if you've met with me, you'll have heard me say this many times. Our bread and butter is one-to-one. We find that works best for students. It is how we get our higher score increases. And the tutor creates a relationship with the student and hopefully the family, and really gets to know where the student's strengths and weaknesses are and how to personalize the prep for them. And I think, honestly, any test prep company would say that they should be personalizing test prep. It shouldn't be a one-size-fits-all situation. But, we really do try to tailor the lesson packages based on the student's strengths and weaknesses as shown in their diagnostic test. An example that I like to give is if you have a student that's really a high scorer in math, we don't have to do a lot of the basic stuff. If we have a student that's a lower scorer in math, we do have to do a lot of the basic stuff, but we don't have to do the most advanced stuff because they're not going to get to those problems anyway, and they can still get a good score without them. And so we really do try to tailor our test prep toward every student, and we change the strategies based on where students are. If they jump up on the practice test, okay, we're going to try something new. We're going to try to get through more problems. We are going to work on some of that harder material now. Another thing that's really important is meeting consistently. This is probably the most important thing. Students that do best with us in test prep meet weekly with their tutor or close to it. Vacations are good, and you're allowed to take a break. And somebody gets sick, that's fine. You take a week off, but generally, a weekly meeting is going to be best. Regular practice exams, and that allows us to work on that content, address those content gaps, sort of really instill those strategies so that students can continue to improve.
And then similarly, from the college counseling side of things, one-on-one is always best. And that's how we also do all of our support, while you also get to tap into what I like to describe as the hive mind of Galin. We have an amazing staff of former admissions director, former high school counselors, as well as independent educational consultants. But we all have not been able to work at the myriad of amazing institutions. So we meet weekly to talk about different student cases, to introduce each other to brand new ideas, to brainstorm, because again, we believe that the whole is much stronger than, the individual. Now, when it comes to how you take advantage of that individual on the college counseling side of things, we have a lot of different programs that kind of meet you where you're at. Our go-to is definitely the comprehensive counseling program. Pretty much what that means is that, as opposed to hourly, which is a bit more ad hoc, comprehensive is all inclusive. So there's a set number of universities or colleges that you're going to be working on with your counselor, and they're going to be available for anything from brainstorming a new club to maybe start at their high school, helping you prepare for rigorous application to maybe a summer program at Yale, for example. Making sure that they're helping you put together your academic schedule. If you're starting with us a little bit on the earlier side, maybe a ninth or 10th grader, they can talk about what type of classes you should be taking, both to be competitive for any college. But if you're an engineer, maybe taking some elective courses in that area would be great as well. And then last but not least, the bread and butter of everything is preparing you for the application process, helping you research, refine, and visit different colleges that could be a great fit for you and your student. Thinking about the role of testing, like we're talking about tonight, that's going to be in your college application process. And the most fun process is writing all of those essays, whether it's your student's personal statement or it's any college specific essays as well. Now, all of those services are still available as we're looking down for the hourly package as well. The main difference, I think earlier I described it as a bit more ad hoc, is that say that this may be like your youngest out of four. You feel pretty good when it comes to, how to plan out a visit or like what type of colleges they might be interested in based on their older siblings. But when it comes to maybe balancing out the selectivity or working through these newer essays that have been out, you're kind of out of your element. That might be great for our hourly focus because, again, you're paying per hour based off of the level of support and also the specific of support that you need. And again, while you're going to have a college counselor from Galin that has your back and is going to be able to support you in the entirety of the process, if you feel like you only need list building help or essay help or trying to figure out what to do to make their outside the classroom profile even more impressive, then you can focus the work that you're doing and that you're paying for even more so. So that's kind of where that hourly fits in. For our families and students that are feeling a little bit more specialized and really have their heart set on University of Wisconsin-Madison and also the remainder of the UW system schools, the Wisconsin package is going to be for you. It includes, I should say, University of Wisconsin-Madison plus two other schools within the system of your choosing as well. And it allows you to take the most straightforward from an A to B perspective in regards to we can work on the remainder of the universities, but this is hometown. We really want to make sure that we're putting on, our best face to apply to Madison. This is going to be the package for us. And then last but not least, if you feel like you have everything great, but it might be a headache and a half to work with your student throughout the writing process, we also do on a smaller capacity as we are available, offer individualized essay review. Usually, we get more students in a bit closer to the process start date. So thinking of the summer heading into the fall of senior year. But again, similar to test prep, we're flexible, we're malleable, we work one on one with our students, and across all the different packages and services that we offer, we want to make sure we're able to meet you all where you're at and give you what you need from us, so you feel like you at least have someone in your corner to kind of demystify things and support you throughout what can be a very fast paced and oftentimes stressful process. And then in terms of next steps, I know we talked about a little bit about this earlier, but Dan, if you want to start with test prep and then I'll jump in for college counseling.
Yep, for sure. So as I mentioned, set up our consultations are free. Set up a meeting with me. We'll chat about your students' goals and everything, but also get to know them a little bit. Talk about their interests and hobbies and the kind of schools that they might be interested in. The matching a student with a tutor is a little bit of an art and a science. It's limited by availability, of course, whose schedule works out when. And but we like to try to match students with a tutor that we think they're gonna vibe with. Again, get started early. Now's a great time for us to start with diagnostics and consultations for sophomores so we can hit the ground running in the spring. And again, we recommend, a lot of schools, the PSAT is an opt-in. There's some schools that require it for all their students, but for most places they don't. And so we think that that's great practice and a low stakes environment for kids.
And similar for college counseling, early is always better. From the ninth grade, 10th grade, we don't just work with the older students as far as 11th grade and 12th graders. At any point that you're interested, you feel like it'd be good to get started and kind of start planning out the skeleton of your student's high school career as it applies to college and admissions. Sign up for a meeting with any of us. Me particularly, I'm always meeting and always happy to meet with anyone who's interested in our services, and especially because their testing requirements are constantly changing. I know Dan earlier kind of went through the more recent breakdown as far as the newer ACT, the differences that you're going to see, the SAT, how it's a bit more, prescriptive at this point. With so much constantly changing in the world of education, it's nice to have someone that you can count on, that you can ask questions about, and it's going to give you an honest answer, as opposed to just convincing you to apply to their college because it's the best one in the entire country and so different than everyone else. We're going to be a lot more honest with you, because each college is going to approach their standardized tests differently. They're currently doing so. And again, with these more recent, newer changing, we're keeping our, kind of finger on the pulse to make sure that we understand exactly where colleges are trending towards and how to best prepare our students both inside and outside of the classroom. Additionally, both for test prep, college counseling, and honestly all the myriad of amazing resources and product offerings that we have at Galin, keep an eye out for our comms team. We have amazing marketing, if I can pat ourselves on the back, that comes out from us, whether it's informative emails, we have a newsletter that we send out to all of our students on a monthly basis. We send out blogs, usually on a weekly basis as well. And then I hope that this webinar has been a good experience for you all, because all of our webinars are usually pretty interactive and informative. And we love for folks to be able to attend those, whether they are currently working with us or not. We believe just giving information and again making you all's lives a lot easier. So keep out for communications on how to kind of stay abreast of what Galen's finger on the pulse is when it comes to college admissions, and then also just how to get in touch with us and possibly start working with us as well.
I want to put in a plug for, again, any junior families that are here, and this would be local to the Madison area. I mentioned before that our bread and butter is one-to-one tutoring. That said, we do run a handful of classes throughout the year. One of them is between the April and June ACTs. And so a lot of students will take the test in school tomorrow as part of the school day testing, and then there's also a test on the weekend of April 11th. After those scores come back, or shortly before, I guess, the April scores come back, we start our class. It's a 7-week class, 2 hours per week, on Sundays or Thursdays. You don't have to attend both. You pick one day. We give off for the extended Memorial Day weekend. It includes one practice exam and it costs $1,200. So if you're interested in learning more about that, we're going to send this out to a lot of, as Justin was talking about communications, this is going to go out to everybody on Wednesday. So if you are a parent of a junior and you haven't done test prep with us, this is definitely an option for you. If you're interested in getting your kids some prep for the June or July ACT. And I should also mention that it's taught by experienced tutors, tutors that have been here almost as long as I have. So it's a good group. All right, we got some questions. I think we should take them in order. I have perhaps a cynical answer to the first question about why scores have gone up so much, but Justin, I'm happy if you want to take that one, or I can take it.
Yes, I can. And I'm
Okay.
just going to do some quick scrolling to read it. So, in general, it's just why have average scores gone up so much at colleges? Has the standardized test changed or gotten easier? Is it related to only strong scores being submitted recently? So I will start this off, though. Then I think you definitely should chime in when it comes to the testing getting easier or how they change that, because it's very interesting how they choose to do it. But kind of starting with an umbrella view, scores have gone up so much. And I'm going to say this person is asking more so recently, coming off of 2020, but it's particularly as I saw in one of our slides the past 10 years or so, because of amazing test prep resources like ours, and also just a higher number of students that are submitting testing and are able to submit testing at a higher clip. Um, with, and I know we heard it all, over the past years, especially colleges are having record-breaking early decision numbers coming through, or overall, this is the highest and most competitive it's ever been. Colleges like to say that year in and year out, and for the most part, it is true. But again, because so many more students are submitting testing, so many more students are taking advantage and are aware that resources like those through Galin's test prep services are available to them, and they really can do wonders in terms of raising your score, that it's just making things a lot more competitive. And then honestly, I will say, and this is a bit more anecdotal, though I'm sure I can find some type of research being done towards this. With these scores going up, we're also seeing a lot of students opting out of sending testing. So if you only have, a percentile, say since the pandemic, if we're looking at a certain university that 50% of its class that are accepted are sending in testing, and then 50% that are accepted are not sending in testing. On the surface level, that's great. It's definitely very equitable as a practice for the university. When you look into the data, if that 50% is only sending because they have the single digit percentile ACTs in the 30s, then that's going to drive up the overall range that you're currently seeing. And that just makes it so much harder for folks to feel like, oh, if I don't have this, 33, for example, then I'm just not going to apply, or I'm just not going to send it at all because they think it might be, too low or quote unquote not a good score, which I'm hearing a lot from our seniors these days, unfortunately. Dan, do you mind jumping in to talk a little bit more about the fun process of how they decide which questions are coming in and the difficulty of each section on a year by year basis?
Yeah, I think it's actually more what you said, Justin. I think it really is this. Colleges kind of the test optional thing was good for them in a couple different ways. Number one, I mean, legitimately became more equitable in a lot of cases, but it does drive those averages up when the lower scores are dropping out. When students with lower scores that would otherwise have had to submit them don't have to anymore. That also makes, sort of like, oh, go ahead and just, Google the middle 50% of the college. Like that doesn't work so well anymore because you don't really know what that means. So I think it's basic. I think it's much, much more what Justin said, as opposed to any sort of difficulty change within the test itself. On the ACT, I will say that our sort of growth and improvement has been very similar to in years past, which I was worried about, frankly, for this year, with the enhanced version. I think if you go on the Reddit forums after the official test, you will always see the students saying it's the hardest math section I've ever seen, and I never, that's kind of an inside joke. And I'm not saying that it's not hard, but if it is hard, the scaling usually adjusts for that. And it's pretty consistent from year to year. The tests are very valid and reliable in that way. The SAT is a little bit harder, only because it's a black box with the adaptive scoring. We don't know. We have a sense of like, okay, this is about how many questions you have to get right to get this score, but we don't know for sure. And sometimes, because every question is, without getting too much into it, every question is worth a different amount. And so the questions that you miss matter a lot. And so, you can imagine an easier question is more punitive than missing an easier question is more punitive than missing a harder one, but we don't know that for sure. So, bottom line, it's not really that the tests have gotten any appreciably harder. They do these tests, the ACT and SAT work really hard to scale them consistently from year to year. In fact, they will put out marketing material, whatever, technical manuals showing that they are consistent from year to year. So it's really not that. It really is more what Justin said about the lower scores dropping out with test optional admissions. It will be interesting to see on the test prep side as more and more schools, so this kind of slow drip of schools that are starting to require scores again, what happens to those averages? I anticipate that will go down a little bit. I can handle this next couple of questions about meeting during the summer and during the school year. That's a question we get a lot. So I'll read the question from the chat. It's sort of two together. Do kids meet more than weekly during the summer? And should kids get tutoring more frequently than weekly over the summer than the school year? We hear this a lot when we get started because, in theory, kids have a lot more time over the summer to meet. In practice, it doesn't usually end up working that way because of vacations and sports and schedules and all that kind of stuff. So it's nice to kind of hit the ground running and try to maybe front load some sessions. And we do that if there are, if we can. But it really does end up being more like once a week when it all shakes out by the end of the summer. One thing that we always do with tutors in our final training, we do monthly trainings. An exercise that we always do every year with tutors before the summer is we make a spreadsheet and we say, okay, for each of your students, plot out what the summer is going to look like. Put your vacations on there, put their vacations on there, put homework on there, put practice tests on there. Let's get the schedule between Memorial Day or between the June ACT, I should say, and Labor Day done. And so that we can make sure that we're tracking enough weeks. Because what happens more often than not is, if there's 12 weeks over the summer, we do 8 meetings. That's no good. We really want it to be closer to 12.
Then I can jump in with this next question, which is focused on if your college counselor is going to be able to advise you on to submit your score, if it's on the lower end of the range for your college. And the example was a 29, which for some colleges, completely, honest, that is going to be on the quote unquote lower end of their average testing, even though it is, a 90th percentile, only 10% of the students nationwide are getting that or above. What I will say is that surface level answer, yes. Your college counselors, whether it's myself or anyone else on our staff, is going to be able to give you that level of advising and expertise and also substantiate the bigger why, whether they would push you at a particular university to send 29 to this college or university, but maybe withhold it at this one. One of the things is that every single college university is different in regards to how much emphasis they're going to put on certain aspects of a student's application, testing being one of them. And then also how much a student can quote unquote get away with in terms of being either right there, say if they're lower end of their average is 30 and you're kind of thinking, well, the 29 is almost there, or is that going to look bad in combination with the course rigor that my student has had by the time they're applying, or their GPA, or their math GPA, or their science, grades that they've gotten. There's so many factors that go into that, that again, your college counselor is really going to be your best friend to be able to help you navigate that decision making. They're going to list out the pros and the cons, and again, like where their expertise is coming from. So you all can make that decision at the end of the day. But I do definitely agree that a 29 considered low is a bit weird because it's still the top 10% of test takers. But unfortunately, I hear so many juniors and seniors saying, I didn't get a good score. It's like, you're one of the best in the entire nation. Give yourself a hand. But yeah, I think I could take this next question too in regards to, I think it's getting at the point of what is the impact and the weight of being a national merit semifinalist for more so highly selective colleges. And in terms of what role does that play in direct admissions? I'm going to start with the latter, then I'm going to, kind of address the former. The direct admission, particularly through the PSAT and how that has a tie into, being a national merit semifinalist or finalist, is still relatively new. Off the top of my head, some universities that I think are tapping into this are like a University of Idaho. I think a Texas Tech is another bigger name as well that comes to mind, but it's not a large swath of universities that are going to take this as into consideration as far as if you are a national merit semifinalist or you get a certain score on the PSAT, we are definitely going to offer you admission. That's still very, very niche in the world of college admissions. So that's just to kind of talk about that aspect of it. When it comes to what weight being a national merit semifinalist carries in terms of more highly selective universities, which if we're defining highly selective, the easiest would be usually the folks that you find in the top 25 or 30 and below on the US News list. More specifically, outside of that ranking, if they're at roughly a 20 or 25% acceptance rate or below, they are the most selective of the most selective, roughly 4,000 to 4,500 on any given year, number of colleges and universities in the United States. it is not going to be incredibly impactful. Yes, it's great to have on your resume, and it's a signifier towards the work that your student has done and their academic preparation by the time they're taking the PSAT in comparison to other students in their area, which is great. But I would be lying to you if I said it's going to be more impactful than their overall ACT score, their SAT, their rank in their graduating class, the number of APs they've taken or honors courses if they're on just an honors curriculum, kind of more so the bread and butter of what's traditionally known as their academic profile. So that's kind of that combination between how being a national merit semifinalist weighs within highly selective and application processes, and how that also ties into some of the newer direct admission policies that we're seeing. I think I can also grab this next one as well. I'm on a roll. This next question is if colleges prefer people to send scores over people that don't. Um, and coming from an admissions background, would think that scores aren't being sent because it was low. And again, I'll say this definitely depends on the college university and also depends on the student. Starting with the college university, I will say that if you're applying to universities that are a bit more of, I don't want to say academically focused, but a bit more numbers driven, and maybe even like their STEM. I'm thinking like a Colorado School of Mines, comes to mind, or like an MIT or a Caltech, where the moniker of them kind of aligns with a data focus to their application process and their admissions process, then again, kind of that advice Dan and I gave you all earlier towards it's always better to have data and not need it than need data and not have it. And the more data points specifically that you're giving to admissions offices, particularly highly selective admission offices, the better because it leaves no stone unturned, and also allows them to be able to use that again, ACT or SAT as that grounding element, the signifier of where your student might match up across the board on a national scale. So when in doubt, it's always great to send, your test scores, especially if they're within that middle 50. Now, if you're applying to a test optional university, I will say with the caveat of some of the more competitive programs, like earlier we talked about engineering, computer science, business on a direct mid side of things, they usually do have a more emphasis on metrics that helps them be able to identify the outlier students who are going to get accepted to those programs. It's usually better to send scores, in that regard. There's always going to be a bit of a but there or an and those circumstances come in where for whatever reason, whether it's because your student just isn't the best test taker, but if you give them time in the classroom, they will knock everything out of the park, or they have a particularly amazing outside of the classroom resume that perfectly aligns with not only the spirit of the schools they're applying to, but also their particular major that they're applying as. In those situations, you can get away with being test optional. But again, these are type of conversations that you have with your college counselor. As a former person in admissions, no two schools are made alike, and Georgetown is going to be very different than a USC versus a Tulane versus a UGA, for example, or a Purdue. So it really just depends on the pathway of the student and kind of looking at everything they've done in and outside of the classroom by the time they're applying as the sum of their parts, and kind of think of how are those parts coming together and what's going to make them shine the brightest by sending or not sending testing. I hope that answered your question. And I think I can grab at least the next one. I think the next two might be yours, Dan, to close this out. But this next question is what score cutoff should you always send versus when you choose to go test optional? Very good question. One that's a little tricky to answer. I would say, even taking into highly selective universities, and that's encompassing of acceptance rate, but also rankings, taking those into consideration. Usually, if you're at a 32 or a 33, that's the type of impressive testing that even if you're applying to a Caltech or an MIT or a UPenn or a Yale, for example, it shows that you are one smart cookie and you can handle pretty much any of the classes, at least the entry first level freshman classes on their campus. You can handle the rigor and the jump from your high school up to their academic level of rigor. Usually the 32, 33 is going to be the safe bet to send, even if they're test optional, because it is such rarefied air. Even though some students may think that's a lower, in the 30s, you're still in the single digits and single percentiles of test takers on a national basis. and it's gonna do well to be able to substantiate the academics that they're seeing via your transcript, the rigorous courses you've taken, and what should be a very strong GPA that you're sending along with that test as well. And as far as SAT equivalency, I'm sorry, I caught my bias from the Midwest. I just talked about the ACT. I would say a 1520 to a 1530 on that SAT equivalency. It kind of walks arm in arm with that 3234. You want to send that because, again, your students work so hard to be able to earn that score. They deserve to see it, and it deserves to be taken into consideration.
I might need your help with this one just on a little bit. Sounds like SAT and ACT are both equally accepted, but just wondering if ACT is more preferable for STEM programs such as engineering. My impression of that is no, and Justin, correct me if I'm wrong on that. I think the the math on the test is just a little bit different. The Just for a little bit of background, the SAT is much more algebra focused.
Yeah.
The ACT has a little bit of everything, which includes more geometry. It's not like it's crazy geometry focused, but it has more than the SAT does. And of course, the ACT does have a science section, but the SAT sprinkles that kind of stuff throughout the sections too. So my impression is that it wouldn't matter one way or the other, even though the ACT has a dedicated science section.
Yeah, completely agree. You're spot on, Dan.
Yep. Do you recommend that students take the writing as part of the ACT test when they sign up, or is that piece not necessary? I am happy to report that that piece is not necessary. They do have to take it in school because it's the state required writing test for high school. Um, it's a it's not a very complicated essay. It's a little annoying because it comes at the end of a long test. Um, but the only students that I've ever had it used to matter basically until COVID, and then a lot of schools started to not care about it. The only student recently that has had to take the writing is a student or students that apply for schools internationally. Sometimes schools abroad do require the writing section, but none of the domestic colleges care anymore. So we pretty much always recommend that students, at least right now, until we know more about the science section, sign up for the paper pencil version of the ACT because the computer version is still new, um, with the science without the writing. I think that's the end of the list of questions, unless I missed any along the way. Does anybody else have anything else that they're wondering about?
Well, Dan, I think we might have done our job in not only wowing the crowd and answering all questions, but being almost perfectly on the dot to wrap up in time so everybody can grab a bite to eat. So,
All right, well, thank you all for joining. Feel free, we had our emails up there for a while. Feel free to shoot us an email. Shoot me an email if you have a test prep question. Shoot Justin an email if you have a college counseling question. We have an info box for anything else you might be wondering about. We do lots of stuff here. We do subject tutoring. We do executive functioning coaching. We even do some grad school work. So, whatever you might be wondering about, we can probably help with. Have a great rest of your week. And again, feel free to reach out if you have any other questions.
take care, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Bye.